What's up, everybody? Welcome back to this episode of Squad's Night In. It's your boy Kahil on the mic, and I'm here with Jaime, I'm here with Josh, and we're going to be talking about education.
Okay, so our first topic, as Gil said, is going to be education in the U.S. And my furthest reaching memory of the education system that, I kind of dislike was when we had to take the FCAT in elementary school. And I remember I took it one day and I got back the results and I didn't make the honors class for the FCAT readings or whatever because it was all standardized. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, what do I do wrong? I'm pretty smart myself, and I thought that I was, smart enough to get into this honors course because, throughout high school, I got in the, CAT, and in college, I feel like I could have gotten into the honors section there, but there's the fact that, I just didn't make the standardization cut, and it's, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I agree. That was one of my hardest, memories, not because the test itself was hard. It was just because when I was in elementary school, the classes were mostly, we were learning, but a lot of it was about having fun. And the teachers always tried to make education fun. And then you had one point in the year where the fun just kind of stopped. And you walked in the classroom and there was just this, air of doom or something. It just wasn't the same. The environment wasn't as happy-go-lucky as it was on any normal day. You could tell, and the teachers always built it up, and it was just this thing that I felt like they were scaring us. Yeah. It's kind of weird, but the test never really seemed hard. I was never really worried about the results. I think as a kid, I was just too busy trying to have fun in school, and learning was just a part of that fun, Mm-hmm. But I just remember just walking into the classroom on that day and. All right, guys, here's a peppermint. Where's your number 2 pencils? Here you go. Here's your Scantron. And, no real test-taking strategies. That was one thing I felt I didn't get. As a kid, it's kind of hard to give kids, test-taking strategies. But, no test-taking strategies. Just kind of here's the test. You're only able to do this section on this day. And the next section, the next day we'll do this next section. And it was pretty brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, in elementary school, we had this, I guess it was this club, it was called the Gifted Club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I remember, so they would take about 3 or 4 people from each class, but I don't think they told us that back then. Back then, I think we needed a test in for it. And so, you have 3 out of 20 of the kids who go out of the class and meet with the other kids in the other classes. And all the other kids really, it doesn't make them feel too good sometimes,
Yeah, I do remember, actually, the Gifted. And I was thinking to myself, I'm certainly no dumber than these kids that are going to Gifted. Why is it that they got chosen and we didn't? And then they would, come back and talk about their pizza parties and how they went to this school, high school or whatever, middle school. And I was just how did these guys get selected? It didn't make me feel too good, but also I didn't feel bad because I just saw it as, whatever. I'm just going to make the most out of this day. Like I said, elementary school for me was just about having fun. And as I said before, education was just a part of that fun, Yeah.
I can't help but feel like some of the kids who didn't get into it, sometimes, if you don't tell someone that they're smart or that they're good at something, they may just never actually see it in themselves. So I feel like some of those kids may have grown up. And, I've definitely seen some of my friends and stuff who grow up and they just don't really try. But I can't help but wonder if instead of maybe being a gifted club, there would have been some sort of seminar or something.
Right.
Where everybody got to feel smart in some way instead of there being kind of that group.
Right. Where the kids were just sort of selected and it kind of put them on this pedestal almost where it was just well, these kids are gifted. We're going to Gifted. And I was thinking to myself, I'm why am I not going to that? I was certainly no dumber than those kids, probably not smarter, but right on the same level. These were my peers, kids that I hung around, and they didn't come off as any more intelligent than I. So it's just kind of weird, and I do get that. It did kind of put us in a weird spot, seeing those kids going off every week, and I was like, what,
Yeah. Well, really, I guess makes, oh no, we have a special guest, it's Mr. Maximillian. He's Jaime's dog, and he sees something right now, but
you might hear him barking throughout the podcast.
Hey, but one thing that I found, kind of frustrating in, I guess, the standardization is the fact that a lot of the things they test you on aren't really applicable to most people. Like, I'd find myself getting angry at the fact that, I failed a test and I couldn't get into a program because I didn't know, or I wasn't interested in algebra, or I wasn't interested in geometry and things like that. And that's the stuff that they force you to learn, even though you're like 9 times out of 10, you're not going to use it unless you're a physics major, or unless you're an engineer. So it's like I got to college and I didn't take a single math class for the first 2 years. I didn't take a single math class because I didn't need to. But, all throughout middle school, I had, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, pre-algebra, pre-calc, calculus, trigonometry, geometry, and I didn't take any of those in college, and I'm probably never going to take them again for my career path, so why did I learn them?
This has always been my thing, and hindsight is 20/20, they always say it, but going through middle and high school, you don't really think about it, but when you get out and you go into college and you're able to sort of create your own path and to do things you want to do and kind of figure out what you want to be and who you want to be, looking back on high school, there was just no sort of difference, in the paths that you could take. It was always really structured, and you felt like you didn't really have a choice. And that was the one thing that I hated. I wish it could be a little bit more personalized. Like, yeah, you had your electives and things, but I guess you could also say that the schools didn't really have money to have super interesting things. But, I would have never figured out I wanted to do engineering. I wanted to be an engineering major unless I carved that path out in college. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was the hardest part for me because I went into college, not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I was a business major, and then I was seeing all these people around me with their business degrees, and they weren't doing anything with them. And I didn't figure out how much I actually liked math until I got into college, and how interesting or how good I was at math itself until I got into college. And I really wish that this was something that I could have figured out in high school. I think it would have saved a lot of credits in high school. Not credits in high school, but credits in college. Oh, goodness gracious. It would have saved a lot of credit hours in college, elective credit hours. And, it was just, I was pretty upset that I started out as a business major when I could have been using all that time and energy on doing engineering and math, which I really, really like.
Yeah, it's like you have to think like some of the artists in our generation, like whether it comes to just different types of artists. Our school was very structured on the math and sciences, but what if it was also more structured towards the arts and people who were sculptors or painters or were musicians or any type of art form, video, making videos, just all these types of art form. What if people were given a chance to do that, and not everybody was just put on this set trail of just math, sciences, and passing the next standardized test, or you're basically a failure if you don't pass that next test, and you go to the remedial classes. And it was kind of like a cycle for a lot of people I saw.
Yeah. I think it's one thing I found interesting was the fact that, and I forgot what I was gonna say, but it was, what was I gonna say? It was something along the lines of I don't know, go back to me, I forgot.
Well, standardized testing in and of itself is a whole different animal, and a lot of people don't like standardized testing, but I've always kind of understood standardized testing, and I always understood that it was just a part of the curriculum and a part of our education system. And also I think that there is a little bit of merit to standardized testing, and I think it's the pressure. I think if you aren't good under pressure, that says something about you. And I'm not saying that in a necessarily bad way. There are a lot of people who are not good under pressure, and there are a bunch of people who are only good under pressure. And I think that was a part of the standardized testing. Like, if you can't perform under pressure, how does that translate to you going into the working environment and to you having a career when the pressure is actually on? It's not a test, but the pressure is still there. And that's the way I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And there were tests that I did pretty mediocre on, but there were tests that I also excelled at when it came to standardized testing. So I think it was only, though, because I just accepted it as another part of the curriculum or the system. And a lot of people kind of put that extra weight on it, their extra pressure on it themselves, and that's really tough.
Yeah, but I feel like there's a lot more beneficial ways to, reenact that pressure other than standardized tests. Like, for example, I'm in a class right now, and what we do is every week we read a series of books. And during class time, we have to discuss those books. And there are no tests in this class, and there aren't like exams and things like that. There aren't quizzes. We just kind of go in and discuss, and it creates this dialogue where, people are under pressure to say something and to actually connect to the readings, but they're not necessarily being graded on like, a standard formula. So it's not like, oh, if you don't, speak enough, you get an F, or if you don't say this or you don't say this. It's just kind of an open-ended conversation, and it allows people to, connect and read into what they want and be able to, learn from each other, and it creates a dialogue and it's that pressure at the same time.
I agree. I do agree that there are different ways to sort of, apply that pressure, but that's a different kind of pressure in and of itself. I mean, that's also a pressure you can get from speech class. I even had some pressure like that literally in high school in Guitar 1 class. I had a teacher, and literally the first grade you got was the Guts recital, and you had the easiest song in the world. Like I said, hindsight's 20/20. So looking back on it, it was literally the easiest song in the world. And even as a Guitar 1 student, the song wasn't complicated. It wasn't something that you couldn't do. Mm-hmm. You may make mistakes, but you were graded on whether you went up and played or not. It was pass or fail, and you had to get over your stage fright or you failed. And I think that's a little bit closer to the pressure that you're talking about, where the pressure is to have that open dialogue, have that conversation, connect to the books, and present that to your classmates. But what about when it's just you, when there's a time crunch? You know what I mean? That's a different type of pressure in and of itself.
Yeah, but I feel like even then, it's just, what do you necessarily gain out of these tests in terms of pressure? I just feel like, it's probably one of the worst, because in the workplace, what they teach you all the time throughout college and throughout high school is, if you're in trouble and, you need some sort of like help or advice, you go ask someone, and you have to, because, a lot of work environments nowadays are more focused on teamwork more than individual work. So you can't just try to, headstrong through all your problems for the rest of your life. You have to be able to, connect with other people and, work compromises out together. Otherwise, you're just kind of putting all this burden on yourself, and I don't think that's healthy either. I think that's what they teach you in school.
This is true in a holistic manner. I do get, when you're looking at the test as a whole, this is very true. But when you break it up, reading, can you comprehend under this time crunch? Math, can you calculate under this time crunch? It's all about your individual qualities rather than, this pressure being put on you. But, holistically, you're absolutely correct. But, when you're doing work, yes, it is about teamwork, but what happens when you're on a deadline and you have to read this and you have to comprehend what's actually going on in the story? You know what I mean? Never. I don't think you'll ever have to, have 45 minutes to just do this. But like, what if you were behind and you have to write up, some sort of speech or some sort of research document or something, and you only have a limited amount of time to do it because your boss just threw it on you and he said, I'm sorry, but we kind of need to have this done. There's your test right there. There's the application of it right there. Now, what I don't agree with, and I think it's more of what you're saying, is how do you grade somebody based off of that? You know what I mean? I think the guts recital was perfect because it was either you did it or you didn't, and if you did it, good for you. You that was that first step, and if you didn't, you had work to do. But life is about that. I think life is about that pressure, and I think it's about whether you do it or not. You can always learn. There's always room for improvement. I don't think anybody's perfect. So when you have 45 minutes to write that essay, I mean, you just have to do it. And I don't think you can grade somebody based off of that. I think that's really hard to grade everybody on the same curve. But it's also like a weeder. You know what I mean? It weeds out the people who can't do it. And I think that was also a part of it.
Yeah. I basically agree. The only thing I'd say about that is like there's a trade-off when you do that, because when you give someone a piece of paper and you tell them that they need to finish this essay within 45 minutes and you give it to a whole class, you're not going to get much creativity. You're literally going to get almost the whole class almost identical essays, except some people have better grammar, but it will always like we can say like that one time when we got the essay and you needed to write about some influential person in 40 minutes. Everybody did Dr. Martin Luther King. It was who would you put on the dollar bill. Everybody did that, and I guarantee that all those essays pretty much look the same with the same structure, and it's almost like you almost trade off the creativity in having someone think, because we're pretty much trained to be very structured about it.
I actually had a coworker who gave me a lesson on creativity, and in that sense kind of weird, but we were talking one day, and I personally feel like, well, when I had that when I had that prompt, I didn't write about Dr. Martin Luther King. I don't know who I wrote about, but I knew specifically that it wasn't him. And I remember talking to my classmates about who they wrote, and they literally all said him. But I was like, I didn't write about him. That's weird. But I just don't think I have a creative bone in my body, and that was my sort of mentality about the whole thing. But he gave me a lesson on it. He says people are different. People are creative in different ways, and those ways aren't always apparent. And I say, well, I can't think of a single way that I'm creative. I can't create something out of nothing. But he says, dude, you're great at math. When you're doing this calculus, there are literally sometimes 6 or 7 different ways to solve a single problem. And how you solve that problem has to do with your creativity. And a lot of the problems are you creative enough to even set this problem up? Are you creative enough to even solve this problem? How do you make these solutions? Can you come up with a creative solution? But that was also a part of it too. I mean, like, there's a bunch of people. I mean, journalism taught me that pressure. And I, for the life of me, couldn't understand how my classmates wrote these amazing stories on these deadlines, on these time crunches. Granted, it wasn't 45 minutes. You had, say a week or two to do this story, but like they made these stories elaborate. When I wrote a story, I just gave the news. I had the quotes, but I gave the news. I didn't make a story out of it. It wasn't the most interesting thing, and that was kind of when I found out that journalism wasn't for me. I could design, I could lay out the paper, but doing the actual journalism, the journalistic work, just wasn't for me.
Yeah, I just feel like the main problem I ultimately have with standardization is the fact that it kind of excludes people who learn different ways.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that, I knew some really smart kids in like middle school and high school who were just really bad at just taking written tests. But like if you talked about them about that same topic, they could go on and on for hours about it, and they actually knew the material. They just weren't good at written tests, because some people learn different ways. You have like oral readers and kinesthetics and things like that, and it basically like forces everybody to learn a specific way. Like when I was growing up, I had no problem doing tests because that's just what I am. I'm really good at just memorizing material and throwing it back up on a piece of paper. It's not that I necessarily learn the material. I'm just good at memorizing stuff and like regurgitating it later.
Right.
And I knew other people who were really good at understanding and connecting with the material, and they could manipulate it whatever way they want and actually critical think about stuff, but they couldn't regurgitate it on paper like I could. And that's the problem.
Right, but that's a part of the problem, and that's something that they need to know how to do. And that's not me just kind of like being on a high pedestal because I can do that. But don't you think that whether you understand the material or not it's almost inconsequential, because when you need to teach it to somebody, does it really, like, it? Yes, it matters that you know it or not, and it does matter if you understand it. But if you can't find a way to regurgitate it or teach it to somebody, what use is that information?
I mean, it's not necessarily that you have to teach it in a certain way by regurgitating it. Like, again, like they could just, sit in the classroom and have a dialogue and talk about the material instead of just giving people exams so they can throw it up. Because 90% of college students, when they take an exam, they do not memorize the material. They simply just, they memorize it for a couple weeks and then they throw it up. That's what I'm saying. But I feel like it's a lot better when you actually have to critically think about the material instead of just memorizing it for a test and then forgetting it.
Right, but I think we can go on this all day, but I do agree with you, and I said it earlier, I do agree that there are better ways we could sort of test that metric and apply that pressure, because that's truly what I think it's all about. But like, we can go on about that all day, so let's move on to...
I did want to counter one last thing.
We'll go for it.
I just, because you were saying about, what if those people need to do that, but what if, like...
Do what?
Like, what if, you're talking about how people need to learn how to do this for their work, right? But then a couple minutes ago, you were just saying how you thought people might be able to do something more creatively. You're talking about that a little bit. So what if reality was flipped, and instead of having to take these tests like that, you would have to do some oral thing, and then that would be a problem.
But that kind of goes back to what I was saying to Josh. Like, I don't think that this is the metric. I think there are better metrics, but I do think that there is value in this metric.
Yeah, I feel like you should be able to, I guess, manipulate, kind of the system so that it works better for you.
Yeah.
So, people like me, I'm a science major. Again, as I said, I'm really good at, just memorizing. Like, I can look at a page in a book, from any book, and I could regurgitate the material at you, and you'd understand it. But I won't memorize it. I don't know what's going on, but I can regurgitate it pretty easily.
Right.
And I think, like, if we were able to, or I guess people were able to, like, pick and choose which type of test they could do, that really brings out their strengths instead of just, forces them to do something they necessarily cannot do, and it makes them feel inferior because they can't do it.
But I do love that you said that. It's so interesting. I hang out with my math professor all the time, and we were actually at the downtown campus up in the professor's office, and there was another professor there, and we always had these very intellectual conversations about, it's one thing to, sort of learn the material for a test, but how well do you understand this material? And there are so many ways to go about understanding material, but the only way you can truly, or not the only way, but the one way that was the best for truly understanding material is having to teach it to somebody else. And we were going on and on about that. But I do think that a part of this too is sometimes in life, you don't get to choose the way things are presented to you. You don't get to cater everything to your specific needs. And that's also a part of it.
Yeah, but I mean, the real question is, do we have to accept that? Yeah. Like, are we not able to change the way that, this happens? Because, if we wanted to, we could ultimately change how the system works. We just don't have to fit into how it works currently.
Right. It's like trying to fit a square block into the triangle mold.
Yeah, it's because the age-old education has changed over, hundreds of thousands of years. How people were taught in the past aren't necessarily how they taught, currently. Because I was talking to one of my professors, and she was talking about how the education system used to be a lot more, I guess, interactive. And there was a lot more dialogue and a lot less just like, regurgitating material, and you actually had to understand it. And I think that's such an interesting point, because in today's society, we're just so disconnected from, actually talking to each other and interacting with material. We're basically just stuck on, like, it's like we're trapped in this kind of system where, we want to learn something, but we can't because we're forced to do something else.
And it's really cool. College, while there are still tests, and I think I will always remember my math professor from the summer, Tony Long, always saying, this is your chance to demonstrate me what you know. Every time he had a test. And, he'd always be like, well, next week you have another chance to demonstrate to me what you know and all these things. But aside from that, I do think, and it does make me happy to kind of see it, but college is just slightly more dialogue based than, any of our other education platforms, middle school, high school, elementary school, all those things. College is a little bit more dialogue based, and I do like that a lot. But I just, I don't know, you can call me, old fashioned or stuck up, but I just think that because in life you don't always get to choose how information is presented to you or how to demonstrate that you understand information, it's a little bit hard for you to then go and say, well, if I could have taken the test this way, I would have done so much better. Anybody could say that, right? If I would have had 3 extra hours on this test, oh man, I would have probably aced it.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily just about, like, the time limit.
No, I'm not.
Like, I know. I'm just saying. I mean, it's like it's the fact that even if you're good at standardized tests right now, I mean, how does that help you with other forms of exams? As you said, you don't get to pick and choose what you're good at. So if the school system constantly teaches you one way, and in life you have to actually use it another way, don't you think that's a big discrepancy that we need to address?
So when you frame it that way, yes, but surprisingly, no, I don't, because when you learn a lot of things, you don't learn it in a way that allows you to apply it to everyday life. You have to get higher and higher and higher before you can even start applying these things to your life. When you start out in math or reading, my first reading class was just us reading books and just seeing if we could understand what was going on. Then it turns into, in high school, it was, do you understand what's going on, and how can you demonstrate to me that you understand what's going on? We had to read books, and we always had to get up and discuss them, but also we had to be able to present these in words on paper. You know what I mean? And math, and starting out early on, you just learn the arithmetic. You learn how to do it when you get higher and higher in math. And this was my biggest, sort of issue with the education in high school is there's no emphasis on application when it comes to math. But when you get into college, I mean, depending on who's teaching you, some classes are literally all about application. And and that's what I'm saying. So like, you don't always get to learn how to apply that stuff until you get way more advanced in it.
But like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because like, again, like, I can bring back the
who am I to say that?
Like, it's the age-old question where people are old enough to take out $50,000 loans for college, and they don't know how to balance a checkbook.
Right.
It's like, it's the simple things that they don't teach us, but they should. But because we're forced to learn this material, we never get to learn certain things that we probably should.
Right.
And,
but I mean, it also goes back to me saying, I wish that we could carve out our own paths. Not that you always get to do that in life, but in high school, I wish we could be a little bit more creative with the classes that we were taking. And certain disciplines require you to be able to do certain things and apply certain knowledges in different manners.
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, it honestly, in some regard, it depends on the teacher, because some teachers, again, they're more
so different.
Yeah, there's some are more better than others. Some just kind of show up to get paid, and others actually show up to teach.
Yes.
And they actually have that drive to
right.
teach the younger generation and things like that, and others just don't.
But it also goes back to I was saying in elementary school how when we first are exposed to these standardized tests, even I remember one year it was even just like a practice, like, oh yeah, this is the practice FCAT, blah blah blah, this is the test you're gonna be taking next year. It was pretty brutal, because it was like I was saying, the teachers didn't really give us any test taking strategies.
Well,
we actually talked a lot on just that one
But
topic.
and that's what I'm saying. We could literally talk all day about it.
So yeah, this really is such a dynamic topic. Do you have any finishing thoughts, Jaime?
Yeah, we kind of overpowered you there. I'm really sorry.
You know, I don't know. I mean, you know, it is what it is. It is what it is, and all in all, I think the education system, you know, for public schools, I think is really good. You know, the teachers are, 90% of the teachers I had were amazing, and 30% of them really, I think, changed my life. And I think, even though there was more emphasis on things like math and science than I would have liked, I still got to take a couple of required art classes and things like that. So I would just say I would like there to be a little bit more of a balance, but that's all for me.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, we are running out of time, so that'll be it for this week's rendition of Squad's Night In.
So, guys, like I said in the last video, don't forget to like this video, comment. Remember, I said this works best when everyone can get engaged and give us topics on things to talk about. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, all those good things. Share the video. And we will see you guys next week on Squad's Night In.